We don't talk about the time I spend in rehab. We don't talk about the time it takes for me to be there 15 minutes before practice and 15, 30 minutes after, and not counting in going to meets. Pretty safe to say weekly I spend about 30 hours just dedicating it to the sport.
Welcome to the Winners Club podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Wilson, and today I'm here with D1 swimmer
Lucia S.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
We're going to get into your mindset and what it's like being a D1 athlete. But before we do that, I'd like to learn about your journey to become a D1 athlete. So can you give us a quick backstory of who you were as an athlete growing up?
I got into swimming I took a different route than everyone else. I was initially afraid of water when I was a kid. And so my mom was like, no, we cannot go on a vacation and you just dip your toes in the water and not go into the ocean. And so my mom signed me up for swimming lessons, and I guess that's when I fell in love with swimming. I was only 4 years old, and then I joined the national team. I think I was 12 years old the first time. And since then, I've been in the national team for junior and then for senior national team. Went to some major competitions like European champs, world champs. And then in my senior year of high school, I got recruited by TCU. And I said, why not? It was kind of like the only way for me to continue swimming and also get an education. And I wanted to change an environment. I wanted to try it out. Worst that could happen is that I go back home, but I would never get the same chance to leave the country and go here if I didn't do it back then.
We're not going to skip over, you're with the national team and you've done national competitions. You've won national competitions. So what did you learn from being with the national team and traveling and all of that?
It's tough. It gets tough at times, and you just have to push through. I had years when I had no break, not a single one. I went for 2-3 years, all year long, didn't get a break. It pays off, and it's great. You get to go to Singapore to compete at the world stage, and the atmosphere and all the countries being there, it's amazing. But sometimes a month before that, you're at a hard training trip. Maybe you see your times dropping a little bit, and maybe you see your times you're adding up, and it's not easy sometimes.
We're going to get to the difficult mental part of it later, but can you list all the countries you've been to, and then from youth championships and traveling with the national team, and then what did you kind of learn from just traveling a lot, and then maybe something specific from one country?
I've traveled pretty much all across Europe. I've been to Canada 3 times. I went to Singapore, as I mentioned, Azerbaijan, Netherlands, Sweden, all over. And one thing I learned, just be mindful of other cultures, how they go through their everyday life. It's different. I think a big cultural shock for me was Singapore. That city is just beautiful by itself, so clean. And it was crazy because they actually have fines for, you get a ticket if you, spit a gum on the street. I wouldn't be scared to go barefoot on those streets.
Wow, yeah.
It was crazy. So I think just that, being mindful, being always polite, you never know who you're meeting, but also just be careful.
Okay. And you came over to America, to TCU. Why did you come all the way over here to play or swim? And then how was that decision, making that decision? Was it scary?
It was definitely scary. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I already had a couple friends in the U.S. and they seemed to really like it. So I was just I took the leap of faith and I was like, yeah, let's do it. Like I said, worst thing that could come, I'm going to go back home. Yeah, and TCU was one of the schools that I got recruited from, but they were very eager to bring me over. They set up a official recruiting trip for me, and they were like, come, we'll pay for everything. And no other school did that. Only after I said, when I was talking to other schools, and I was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going on a trip, TCU invited me. They were like, oh my God, maybe we should split the cost. And I was like, but you wouldn't do this if I didn't tell you that I was coming.
Right.
So I think that was a big decision factor for me, that TCU really, really wanted me here. And I mean, I loved the campus. It's a great school. I love the coaching staff. And so, yeah, I decided that TCU was the place to be.
What was kind of like the biggest difference just culturally coming over from Slovakia to America that kind of shocked you when you first came over here?
I remember until this day when a stranger, like, I mean, I guess a stranger to me on campus just said, "Hi, how are you?" And I just like looked at him like, why are you talking to me? And when I told like my roommate about the experience, they were like, "Oh no, that's just Southern hospitality." I'm like, "Southern what? Like, what are you talking about?" Because I guess back home we just like all mind our own business. Honestly, sometimes even when you see like someone you know on the street, not every time, but sometimes you just like, you don't look, you just keep going. And here everyone is just so welcoming. They greet you when you go into store, when you leave the store. That was the biggest change for me. And also just like the small talk and just, you know, how it's so polite to just say like, "Hey, how are you?" But you're not expecting like a full answer like, "Oh, you know, like it's been tough for me and I've been through this and that." Like, no, here it's just like, "I'm good, how are you?" And that took some getting used to as well, because I was like, "Oh my God, they want to know how I am." Because when I asked that back home, it was like I was expecting a full-on conversation. Here it's just like politeness. And yeah, so that first few months I was like, okay, I need to get better at this because they think I'm a freak.
Competing in your first year, you say you didn't do that well, but like on paper, I think you won one or two competitions. And so pretty much every athlete I've interviewed said that the first year was difficult for them. So how long did it take you to get in the flow of things?
I think it took about 4, maybe 5 months. Before that, I was like I was falling behind everyone, even though it was, let's say, my main event, not theirs. But yeah, in the second half of our season was pretty good for me. I would say even like my first Big 12s, they were pretty successful. I was on a few relays that set like school records. So that was super exciting.
What led to that building your confidence? Is anything change, or is it just kind of just getting used to things?
I think getting used to things, also kind of, you know, finding my people. I think I struggled with that the first few months, just because I'm from a different country. I'm not saying I didn't have a language barrier, but I was very shy and just afraid, like, oh, what if they make fun of me if I pronounce something differently? And so then finding my people, my friends that I felt comfortable around and that I felt good, like, or being around, was a big factor when you're almost alone in a new country, across the ocean, can barely talk to your parents because, like, you know, your morning is their evening and the other way around. Kind of having to learn everything in school in a different language, it was just a lot. So I think it took about 4 to 5 months to just kind of get into it and get over everything.
Yeah, you broke 2 school records, and you also broke 2 records, national team record when you were younger. So those 4 records, are any other records you're not telling me about? Anything else?
I don't think so. No, I think you're keeping a good track of them.
Yeah. So how did you break the records?
How did I break the records?
What do you think kind of led to it? Is it just things lined up perfectly? Your training, your competition, your teammates. How did this happen?
Sometimes it's honestly when you least expect it. Sometimes I think when you are too much up in your head, like, oh God, I trained so hard, I need to perform, I need to do good. It makes me more nervous because I feel like there's so much expectation on me. Sometimes when I'm just like, yeah, like, you know what, I'm going to give it my best. I did the work. I know I did. And we'll see where it goes. And suddenly, oh, there's a record. Like, I don't even know how I did that.
Just keep swimming in it one day. It might happen.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, now we'll get into your mindset. So off the bat, are there any kind of things you do to take care of your mental health and to deal with the highs and lows of your sport?
It's a tough question. It's always just like taking a step back, and I think like when things get hard and crazy, taking a step back and realizing why you're doing it, what you're getting out of it, and the mental side of the sport is sometimes, I want to say, more important than the physical. And I mean, if you're not okay mentally, you're not going to be doing well physically. And so it's usually treating myself to maybe my favorite meal, or going for a nice cup of coffee. You know, just doing something for myself that makes me happy. and winding down, just relaxing, not worrying about everything.
It's good to understand, like you said, understand why you're doing it before I'm just gonna do this just because I'm good at it or just because I can get this reward, but I really understand why. You told me earlier that when you were younger, you got injured, and was that kind of your lowest moment, or was there? I mean, it kind of led to more low moments because you're still kind of dealing with it. But how did you kind of get through that, and it was like understanding your why part of it?
I think when it first happened, I didn't really like think about it too much. I was like, oh, that can happen to anyone. It's gonna be a month and then it's gonna go away. Well, I was a little wrong there. 7 years and counting. The hardest part was because it happened at the peak of my career. I just went to World Champs. I was on my coach was training me to go to senior European championships while I was still a junior. And I was on a great path. Like, I could have done it easily, but I didn't, unfortunately, make it. And I think just realizing that I'm not where I could be, because I know I'm working the hardest I can and just doing everything I can, and it's still not there, was the hardest thing to accept. Back home, my coaches weren't as understanding of it. Sometimes when I would complain, they were just like, oh, just swim it out. It's like, I can't just swim it out. Like, I've been swimming it out for years.
It sounds like you had a lot of outside factors that really impacted your sport, but like on paper, you still were doing well. So how did you kind of block out all the extra noise and really focus on your sport?
Mostly, I knew I was good, and I knew I could still do it. Maybe not as, I couldn't maybe progress as fast as I wanted to. But I did all I could, and I just knew that, okay, I did what I could. I took care of myself as best as I could, and we'll see where it goes.
Sounds like you're confident in your ability. What do you think it was all talent growing up? And then if not, like, what kind of led to your ability, and how do you build your confidence?
I think it started out when I was around 12, 13, when I started, like, beating my peers, and I started winning national titles is kind of like when it kind of started. I think when I was like, okay, I guess I can be just as good as everyone else, if not even better. And every single time I could push myself further and get a new best time and get a new title and just win another race was always the incremental, like, adding up of your confidence. I remember at one national championship back home, I was racing the 200 free, and I was 14 years old at the time, so I was a junior, and I beat seniors that were in the final with me, and I got a standing ovation from the whole pool, and that might have been one of the greatest moments in my life. When the whole pool was standing and clapping, and I was just like in awe. And I was like, "Whoa, this is for me!" Like that was crazy.
How do you deal with pressure?
Every time you have a lane, you have a chance, pretty much. And that's kind of like a cheesy way to say it, but it's true. In the end, it doesn't matter if you're their favorite or not. You're doing it for yourself, and you can show up, whether you're in lane 4 or whether you're in lane 8.
How do you deal with failure? How do you deal with losing? I bet you're a competitive person. So how do you deal with losing?
I try to see it as a learning opportunity, and every time, like, whether I did well, whether I didn't, kind of just like seeing, okay, what can I do better? And if I didn't do well, it's like, so what went wrong? What did I do wrong that I didn't do well?
How do you overcome fear in general? You said sometimes you're afraid to give your best matches because of your injury and everything. But how do you overcome that fear? Maybe sometimes it might be the best thing to overcome that fear when you're injured, but just in general, maybe, like I said, a big match, a big meet. How do you overcome the fear?
I think it's always reminding myself that I've done all I could leading up to that moment, that I've done all the work, and I'm at a place where I'm supposed to be. And I try to remember that the world is such a big place, and my problem is so little. And I mean, my longest race literally takes like minute 50. Like, I'm not hurting for longer than 2 minutes ever. So it's just like reminding myself, like, I've done this in practice so many times, I can do it one more time. And I have all the experience in my bag. Like, I mean, I've been swimming since I was 4 years old. I'm 23.
Yeah.
Like, I've done this so many times. And I think just knowing that I also have my support group, behind me, my coaches, my teammates, and my family, and that they're like cheering on me no matter what. And that a race or, a slow time doesn't define me as a person if it goes wrong.
I want to hear some stories from your either national team days or just because you've been in some big competitions. So what's one that you've like kind of overcome a big adversity and you're able to overcome that and perform well?
In 2015, I went on European Games in Azerbaijan, and I just wanted to do really well. I wanted to like show up because the year before I had a really great European Championship meet. And I was just like, I want to at least get to the semifinal and perhaps even final. Like, what if I can do it? And I just like really wanted it, and that's when it didn't go well for me. I remember not getting a personal record in any single event I swam. I wasn't super far off, but I've done some major mistakes in my races. And I think it was because I wanted it so bad. And sometimes when you want it too bad, it's like you just start making these mistakes and you don't realize them. And it just wasn't there. And I think I was very upset about it. But then at the end of the summer, there was the World Championship awaiting. So I had another chance. And when I came there, I swept all my races and got PRs, and it was a great time racing. So I think it's just realizing that, like I said, that one bad race doesn't define you, and every time you step on that block, you can do well. Like, you get another chance at it, and you can take a little different approach. You can remember, okay, what did I do wrong last time that I don't have to do wrong now? And just, making those minor changes in your race can bring a huge difference.
And that's similar to something that I think Michael Phelps has said one time, where when you focus so much on the outcome and on winning a medal, you actually have a less chance of doing so because you're focused on all the wrong things. When you focus just like on performing well, you get the desired outcome by accident, really. Kind of like what you said about the records, where we didn't really focus on the records. That's when you broke the records. When you're going to races and meets now, what are you kind of thinking about? Like, obviously you want to do well, but are you thinking about the end product, or are you thinking about just performing?
I think I'm more thinking about performing now. I'm trying to execute well. I'm thinking, okay, be focused on the start. When you go off the blocks, think about the turns, how you go into them. Maybe don't breathe into your turns. Don't breathe out of your turns. Kind of just like eliminating everything that could possibly slow me down.
You have like sports psychologists or things like that?
Yes.
What did you kind of learn from, like, were you able to do a couple sessions?
I did, yes. Okay. And it was different for me. I think back in my country, it's a bit of a taboo to talk about mental health. And when I came here, I was just like, no, I'm not going to see a shrink. I'm not crazy, you know? But that's not really it. Going to a counselor doesn't mean that you have some, problem. I mean, even if you have a problem, like everyone has problems. And I've noticed when I went, I was a bit skeptical, but it actually felt great. It felt great talking to someone that was just, like a third party, unbiased, just could give me maybe their advice and just even listen to me ramble about something. I find myself that getting all that stuff out of my chest is already what helps me. Because sometimes I guess everything just builds up inside, and maybe talking to your teammates is not the best option. I also just don't want to throw my problems at them. And so just like getting it out of my chest, talking it through, and seeing that it's not really that big of a deal sometimes greatly helps.
It's kind of like wearing a backpack. All of our mental problems are wearing a backpack, and usually we just keep it in to ourselves. We don't want to burden anybody else with it. We're just carrying around this backpack all the time. But you're talking to someone professional or maybe family, but sometimes teammates, but you don't want to put all your problems on them. But just talking to someone is this release the backpack, releases all the burdens. So would you recommend speaking to a professional about that, or just talking to people about your problems, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you should just go around and being like, "Hey, do you know what happened to me?" And just like, boom. But I think you should maybe pick your people. You know, some people are good to talk to about maybe just your career goals. Some are good to talk about your goals in your given sport, school, whatever it may be. And honestly, if you don't feel comfortable talking to your family or your friends about your problems, then I would definitely recommend going and talking to a counselor.
Thank you for sharing that. You said some great advice so far. Now we'll get into the final 5 questions. These are the final 5 questions I'd like to ask all the athletes. So the first one is, what are some misconceptions about being a D1 athlete?
I think one misconception is that life is just great for us, that we have everything we can imagine, you know, well, you have all of this paid for, and what should you worry about? And it's like honey, like I'm studying as much as you. I'm in maybe 18 credits, plus I'm giving minimum of 20 hours to my sport, because 20 hours is only the time we're practicing, but we don't talk about the time I spend in rehab. And getting a treatment there. We don't talk about the time it takes for me to, you know, maybe change into like my swimming suit and everything, and be there 15 minutes before practice because we have to like warm up, activate, and then another 15-30 minutes after. And now, you know, traveling to and from the pool that's outside of campus, it's even longer than that. So it would be pretty safe to say that like weekly, I spend about 30 hours just dedicating it to the sport in one way or another, not counting in going to meets and training trips. And that's, I would say, is another misconception, that they're like, oh, but you travel so much. You went to this, I don't know, you went to Florida for a training trip. And I'm like, what I saw was the swimming pool, the hotel, and we went to the beach once for 2 hours. So and they think that we get to travel and it's our vacation. I'm like, no, like I'm working even harder there than what we usually do in practice. Like those are the hardest weeks of the season.
Right, and then you're missing school and class, and then you get back, you have to do double the load. So that's a lot of work. Then what's your worst conditioning workout you've had from swimming? Either so whether from a national team or from college, what do you think is the worst one?
There's been a few, but one I remember very vividly is when I was on the national team, and we just did like a long breaststroke set. I'm not a breaststroker, and it's also the slowest stroke, so it took forever. And I was hurting, or like my whole body was hurting, because I was using the muscles I never use, and it was just like, I think 10 400s breaststroke, just I would say that was garbage yardage. I don't know what the use was for that. I think that was more hard mentally than physically, because I didn't want to do it. And I was just like, what is this good for? Like, I don't even swim breaststroke. And so just like getting through a long practice like that sometimes is even worse than when you have to, you know, go off the blocks and just sprint. And I think there's a difference between two different like mental practices. One is, like I said, 10 400s breaststroke. That's like, I'm just bored. I don't know why I'm doing this mental kind of prep, or like just going through that. And then a different practice where it's hard and you know it is good for you. It's just hard. And you kind of have to like just brace yourself and be like, okay, I gotta do it. And just during the set, it's hurting. Your lungs are on fire because you're almost barely breathing, and you don't get much rest. You just have to keep going. And that's, I think, when you get better, when you're like, come on, push yourself, just one more, or maybe 2 more, like you can do this.
Now we'll talk about the good stuff. So what was your best memory in your sport? You've done a lot of competitions, nationals, all these things. So what was kind of your best? It doesn't have to be a trophy or meet, just in general, what was your best memory?
It was a prelim finals meet, and I was swimming in prelims, not expecting much of it. I was just like there to get to finals, to perhaps show up. And when I touched a wall and I saw my time, I got an A cut for World Championships, which I just did not believe how I did that. And I remember my best friend being at the end of the pool where I touched a wall, and she saw it too, and she got so excited, and I ran out of the pool and she hugged me, and we just share this moment. And I think her genuine happiness for me was kind of like, I mean, maybe even the better part of it, that I wasn't there to celebrate myself only, that others were celebrating me, and just feeling their support, and that I had people to rely on, and that I had people that were happy to see me do well, is, I think, the greatest gift I got from the sport.
You believe that saying, where their happiness is better shared? Because a lot of times when we're athletes and we win, we're kind of expecting to win, so it's not that great. So, but it's better when you have a teammate or a friend that you can share with. So, do you believe in that saying?
Absolutely. It makes the moment so much better, because, like I said, they're all celebrating you, and you're not on your own, and they've been there for you through your ups and downs.
What advice would you give to high school athletes that are coming into college? And you probably also speak about dealing with the national team, things like that. So, what kind of advice would you give to a younger athlete that wants to compete at a high level?
Keep your options open. Don't just focus on maybe one school because they are famous for something, and find the right fit for you. I think that's something I would try to get. That's kind of advice I would give them. Don't be afraid of trying new things. Visit every single school that you can go to. Like I said, find your perfect fit, and you have to know that it is going to get hard. And just, I think what helps going into college and into maybe being on a national team and going into big meets is like realizing that the work is going to be hard, but it can be also very rewarding. And like you said, that sometimes people focus on the outcome instead of the work. And I think if you're committed and if you do your best, you're already on a great path.
And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, how would you define the word winner?
Just realizing that maybe you did something better than last time. Maybe you made, I don't know, your strategy was different and it worked, and you committed to it, and sometimes it doesn't have to work out, but you just made that change, you tried your best, and maybe just look for those little victories. Doesn't have to be in your race, it can be in your day. Did you do something that day that made you better? And that can be a little win too. So I think just looking at every single day with a gratitude and realizing that, like, what your blessings are, and maybe what you did that day that made you better in one way or another.